Please give a round of applause.
Well, it's great to be with you this afternoon. Before I start, let me introduce to you my son, Max. Max, wave your arm over there. Max is my oldest. My wife and I, Mikey, have 4. 7, 5, 3, all boys. And then a baby girl who just turned 1. So we're busy.
Not so much.
We're odd year people. I want to thank you for what you do. I want to thank you for being involved in the Tea Party. I want to thank you for reminding Americans and Republicans what this country means, our roots, where we came from, what we should stand for, that this is a government that's supposed to be a limited government. Because all too often, I think, the folks in Washington, D.C. forget that. I had the great privilege of serving you in the United States Senate for 16 months. I was the first United States Senator from Broward County. This is my home. I was born in Fort Lauderdale. My grandfather came to Fort Lauderdale in 1951 in a 1949 Pontiac with 5 screaming kids in the back. Came down here, didn't know anyone, didn't have a job, but he was in the trades. He did a construction, a carpenter, and he worked for someone else. It was LeMieux Construction eventually. He started his own company. Until recently, when my dad retired, it was the longest continuously run construction company in Broward County. My dad went to Fort Lauderdale High School with this young lady over here, Senator Debbie Sanderson. And he worked out in the hot Florida sun, and his only ambition for his son, his only child, was I would one day not have to work outside and I could work in the air conditioning. And I've achieved that goal. But Mom and Dad didn't go to college, but they worked hard, small business folks. You know, when you grow up in a family that's a small business family, my mom worked for my dad, and then they had some carpenters that worked for them. You can't help but be a Republican. Because small business people realize that you only can spend as much money as you take in. And that every tax, every regulation, everything that the government makes you do that makes life more difficult just ends up costing money and keeping you from succeeding in life and keeping you from hiring more people. But they focused on my education. My wife Mikey and I grew up here in Broward County. She moved here when she was 3. We grew up in Coral Springs, went to public schools all the way through. We didn't meet again until our high school reunion. Now, if she were here, she would tell you if I would have asked her out in high school, that we could have cut 10 years out of that, and we would have been together sooner. I'm here to tell you she would never have gone out with me. She was way too cute and way too popular. But we made our home here in Fort Lauderdale until I had the chance to do some public service. Now, I was involved, as you know, with the Republican Party here. I was the chairman of the Republican Party here in Broward County from 2000 to 2002. Then I was asked, thank you ma'am, then I was asked to go to Tallahassee to be the Deputy Attorney General. Charlie Crist asked me to go be the #2 person in the AG's office.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd do that for a couple of years and then come home to Fort Lauderdale. Because it was a real honor to be the #2 law enforcement officer in the state of Florida. We got to prosecute cases and took a case all the way to the United States Supreme Court in a death penalty case. But something happened on the way to the fair and I ended up being in Tallahassee for 5.5 years. And you know I was Charlie Crist's chief of staff for the first year he was governor. And then I was back in private practice, in private life, when Senator Martinez decided to resign. And when he resigned, there was a search. I didn't think I would get picked. I was honored that I did. And I went to Washington in September of 2009. September 2009. September 10th of 2009. It's the day I was sworn in. I served you for 16 months. And it was the privilege of my life. But I want to tell you, as much of a privilege as it was, I've never been associated with a more dysfunctional institution than the United States Washington, D.C. is bizarre, and it is broken.
Yeah.
Corrupt. And it is corrupt in many ways. And it's worse than you know. And you know more than most people do. Because you're paying attention, you're focused, you're keeping us back to our values that made this country great. But I want to tell you, the way this government misspends your money is outrageous. And it's like a bizarro world. I first got there, run a business here, help run a law firm here in Florida. We can only spend as much as we take in. Like your businesses, like your families. Even in state government. Now that's not pretty either. But at least they can only spend as much as they take in. They're going to cut $3.5 billion out of the budget this year because they can't spend more than they take in. We've got a balanced budget amendment in Florida. In Washington, D.C., there's no such thing. They don't even look at how much they take in when they decide how much they're going to spend. They call it a budget. It's not a budget if you don't look at what you take in. They just take what they spent last year and they add to it. And they don't even know what they're spending the money on. I'm not kidding. These agencies have been around and they are spending priorities and policies and bills and laws from the 60s, 70s, 80s without any evaluation as to one, whether those were good to start with, two, whether they're still good, three, whether or not they're being done efficiently and effectively. Congress doesn't do oversight. They don't bring these agency heads in, these cabinet secretaries, and say, Madam Secretary, tell me about your budget, tell me whether these programs work, tell me whether or not we should get rid of them, and whether or not you've got metrics in place to evaluate whether they're good or bad. They don't do that. These agency heads, they're there for 18 months on average. They call them in Washington to summer help. So this is what it is. It's a snowball, and it's rolling downhill on its own energy. And it gathers and gathers and gets bigger and bigger, and it's out of control. And these people in Congress walk around and whistle through the graveyard like nothing is wrong. And it's not just the Democrats.
That's right.
Most of the Republicans don't get it either.
That's right.
Now it's getting better because we elected a whole new crop of people like Alan West and Marco Rubio and Dan Webster. I can still tell you there's not enough of them. And I can tell you why. And here's a perfect example. They're talking now about cutting $60 to $70 to $100 billion out of the budget.
Right.
That is around the fringes. This budget this year is $1.6 trillion in debt. $1.6 trillion deficit. That means we are spending $1.6 trillion more than we're taking in. Okay? How much is $1 trillion?
1,000 billion.
It's 1,000 billion. 1,000 billion. It's a million. It's a million billion. So here, let me put in these numbers, these aliens, and the joke in Washington is don't tell Obama what comes after trillion. Right? Let me put it in a way that I think is easier to understand. If you take $1 bills and laid them on this floor and carpeted the floor, $1 million in $1 bills covers 2 football fields. Okay, you can picture that in your mind. It's 1,000. $1 billion in $1 bills carpeted on the ground covers Key West, Florida. 3.4 square miles, Joe, covered. Think of Duval Street with $1 bills going down the street. Stranger things have happened in Key West. You sound like you know. $1 trillion covers Rhode Island twice. This is an enormous amount of money. So we're going $1.6 trillion in deficit this year. We've gone up $3 trillion in deficit in the last 2 years. $5 trillion in the last 4. My friends, it took this country 200 years to go $1 trillion in debt around 1980, and we're going more than $1 trillion in debt a year. It's amazing.
Terrible.
So when they talk about cutting $100 billion, we're going $5 billion in debt a day. You're talking about 20 days' worth. This is like bailing out the sinking ship with a thimble.
That's not even counting the interest.
It's not even counting the interest. So we've got to do something a lot more significant than that. Now, why do we have to do something, and why do we have to do it now? Well, what's going to happen in Washington is we're like that family who is trying to make their credit card payment, and it's getting out of control, and then there's a month where they can't make their minimum payment,
Right.
and then the credit card company or the bank cancels their card. That day's coming.
Very soon.
That day is coming.
Coming soon.
We've been talking about debt for a long time, but there is a point when you have to pay. So right now we spend $200 billion a year making the interest payment. $200 billion. Our state budget, by the way, is $66.5 this year. $200 billion on interest on programs we shouldn't have paid for in the past. By the end of the decade, it'll be $900 billion. We can't make a $900 billion payment. Next year it's $260. So sometime between 2012 and 2020, the government's going to go broke. The government will not be able to make its interest payment. We're not talking just about my 4 kids or your grandkids. You always hear politicians say that. We got to stop spending for our children's future. That's true. But it's not going to wait for Max, Taylor, Chase, and Madeline, my 4 kids. It's going to happen now. Sometime before that day, when we can't make our payment, the world financial markets are going to figure out that we can't make our payment. And you saw what happened in Greece. Did you see last weekend in London
Yes.
when they were protesting in the street and breaking the windows in stores? This is serious. This is the greatest threat to our country, internal threat to our country, since the Civil War. We had Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in front of the Armed Services Committee, where I serve, testified, and he was asked, what's the most extreme threat facing America? He didn't say Iran, he didn't say North Korea, he didn't say Al-Qaeda, he didn't say China, he said the debt. So I have a plan to fix this. A lot of people tell you we need to make cuts. They don't have a plan to do it. By the way, balanced budget amendment. I offered one, everyone does. It's the right thing to do. But that's easy talk. It's easy talk. It takes 2/3 of the House and Senate to get it done. So people say, oh, I offered a balanced budget amendment, but then they go right on spending, right on earmarking. By the way, I didn't do any earmarks.
You know
Not
that?
one.
Good.
We know that. At best, those earmarks are the engine that drive the spending train.
That's right.
Because if you get a project in a proposal, in a budget item, and then that budget's 20% more than last year, you can't vote against it, because your project will go down. It's the gateway drug. At worst, they're corruption. Because someone wants that project, and you know they're going to give you money if you vote for it in your campaign.
Yeah.
I never did an earmark. But here's the proposal I have. Let's go back to 2007 level spending for the federal government. And I don't just mean discretionary. You hear Speaker of the House Boehner, and I have respect for him. He's talking about going back to 2008 level discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is 15% of the budget. You do defense, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that's 85% of the budget. I say cap everything at 2007 levels. All entitlements, all spending. Now this is 3.5 years ago, my friends. This is not 1930. It's not 1950. It's not 1980. Can we not live off of what we took in 3.5 years ago? If we capped all spending at that level, it would do 2 things. It would make Congress do its job. They'd have to prioritize. They'd have to do what Senator Sanderson did when she was in the state legislature, what Commissioner LaMarca has to do here in Broward County. They'd have to look and see whether or not these proposals were good or bad, working or not, get rid of the ones that weren't. So they'll do their job. The second thing is if you cap total spending at 2007 levels for the next 10 years, by 2013, 2 years from now, you balance the budget. By 2020, instead of having a $26 trillion debt with a $900 billion interest payment, you cut the current debt of 14.5 to 7, and you save America. These are trying times. We need people who are going to go to Washington with the courage of their convictions to do what is right, and guess what? You know what they should do after that? They should come home.
That's right.
And we want to live on. That's right.
Not more than 8
So
years.
I'm as worried about this as I've ever been worried about anything. But we can fix it. It is not America that's broken. It is the government that's broken.
That's right.
I love that shirt.
That's it.
I love that shirt. Go back and read, if you haven't read it recently, go back and read Reagan's first inaugural address in January of 1981. It sounds like he's speaking to us today.
That's right.
Sounds like he's speaking to us today. But we can fix these problems. I want you to believe, as I know you do, the ability of Americans to rise to any challenge. Every generation, Americans have come forward and done what they needed to do to fight either an external enemy or solve an internal problem. There's nothing we as Americans cannot do. We fought Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany at the same time, and we beat both of them. We landed on the moon.
That's right.
We're curing cancer. We are mapping the very fabric of life in the human genome. And in our spare bedrooms and garages and even now dorm rooms, Americans are inventing the greatest inventions in the world and creating the world's greatest companies and employing millions of people who can then pursue their dreams. We are, as Reagan said, that shining city on the hill.
Amen.
We are, as Lincoln said, that last best hope for man.
That's it.
We are that nation upon which God shed His grace. So I am so thankful for you, what you stand for, what you do, that you hold people accountable, that you bring these issues forward. We would not be where we are today without you. We will not solve our problems unless you continue to fight.
Amen.
Thank you for letting me be here.
I get the first question before I stand next to him.
And I get the second one.
Excuse me. And I'm going to take two. Denise is not here, so I'm going to take two. They're not her questions. Will probably be the most uncomfortable ones for the senator, but that's the way I am, as you know. All right.
Go ahead, Jack.
Senator, people perceived you in the past as having close ties to Charlie Crist. Can you tell us about your relationship in the past
Good question.
and how it is today?
Well, you all, as I told you before, I worked for Charlie Crist.
Yes, you did.
But when he left the Republican Party, the day after, I endorsed Marco Rubio. That was the right thing to do. I've been a Republican my whole life. I was a teenage Republican president. I was a college Republican president. I was a young Republican president. I was a county chairman. I believe in the principles of our government, of our party. I believe in limited government. I believe, as Thomas Jefferson said, that government that governs least governs the best. So when he took his walk on the other side, I couldn't go there, and I stood up for my party. And I think that shows something about me, that I'm willing to make tough decisions.
Thank you very much. The next question. Senate Bill S-510, the Food and Safety Modernization Act. Explain your vote. Because as I know it, unless somebody else can bring some up afterwards, that's the only vote that went against the grain of conservatives. Sir.
Food safety bill. Controversial bill, but a bill to try to modernize food safety in this country. We had not changed that law for 70 years. So we have a food safety law. We just have an out-of-date food safety law. The bill's not perfect. There was a Republican substitute to the bill that was supported and authored by my friend Tom Coburn from Oklahoma. I voted for that. I liked it better. It was smaller. It was more efficient. It was less government. But it didn't pass. So I had to make a decision to vote. And I wanted to make sure our food is safe. So I know that you may disagree with me about that. Hopefully it's the only thing that you do. But I had to weigh it. I had to do what I thought was right, and that's why I made the decision.
Thank you. Okay, Norm, you're up. You're second.
Okay, Senator, as a recovering Democrat, sorry, I joined the Independent
Speak up, sir.
Party. Sir, the Republican Party left the Republicans, okay? Now, how do we get rid of the Republicans that left the party?
Well, I think you run the right candidates. And we saw some primary wins last time. You know, Marco Rubio won, and Rand Paul won, and others won around the country. And the right Republicans won. It's not just good enough to have an R next to your name. You've got to believe in the values that made this country great. You've got to be a conservative, someone who believes in limited government, and someone, to me, most of all, who's going to tackle this debt and deficit.
I'll second that.
Me too.
Senator, on term limits, we talk about the representation and the representatives. How about the judges also? Supreme Court judges. Why don't we just do 8 years? Do you think that's
For the U.S. Supreme Court justices?
That's right.
Yeah, I've not heard that before. We have to change the Constitution, but
Why can't we do that?
we could. We could.
So do you go along with the 8 years?
Well, I want to think about it. I've not thought about it before, so I'll think about it.
Okay. Julie, then Gabriel.
First, I'd like to thank you for coming here and for the wonderful things you said. Acknowledge who you really are, not what the media says about us. So I'm going to change the subject and talk about foreign policy, in particular about Israel. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today about the possibility that the United Nations is going to create a Palestinian state out of the West Bank. Could you talk about that and your feelings about Israel and this administration's relationship to Israel and what's going on?
So the question is about Israel, feelings towards Israel, and UN potentially creating a Palestinian state. We have to stand up for our allies. Our foreign policy has to be based on this premise, in my view. We are going to support and have good negotiations and good relationships with countries that believe in our God-given rights. Remember, the Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That doesn't just mean Americans.
It means everybody.
That means everybody in the world. And the Israeli government believes, like we do, that people should be able to elect their leaders, criticize their leaders, worship freely, all of those great, the rule of law, what makes societies, free people, able to succeed and pursue their dreams. Our foreign policy, for too long, in my view, has been transactional. Now, maybe during the Cold War, when we were in this monolithic struggle with the Soviet Union, we could say that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And we could say, we don't care what you do to your own people because you're going to help us in this big struggle. Not anymore. Not anymore. So I'm 100% pro-Israel. I'm not for any of these countries who treat their people badly. I mean, it should not be lost on us that 15 of the 19 terrorists who flew planes into buildings on 9/11 were from a country that we call an ally. We can't have that same old foreign policy. So as it comes to Israel, as it comes to the people in Cuba who are fighting their regime, I'm 100% with them, and I think our policy has to be with them and against those who would try to take away their freedom.
Gabriel, you're next, and then we're going to go to this side of the room before we get to Carl and Javier. Go ahead, sir.
Listening to you speak, you seem like you like what we're doing as a Tea Party. My question to you, yes or no answer would be fine. When you get to Washington, if elected, will you join the Tea Party coalition with Rand Paul up in the Senate?
I haven't thought of it, but I certainly would consider it.
So is that a yes or a no?
I'm giving you an honest answer.
All right,
which is I want to reflect on it. I support what you do, and I support your values, so I don't see why I wouldn't do it, but you got to give me a chance to think about it if you would.
Fair enough. Okay, let's go this side of the room here. My girlfriend Mary there, please stand up. Speak up, ma'am.
I'm very concerned. Is it true that the congressmen are not profiled? You've got all these books up there, Is that true?
What do you mean profile?
Investigators,
They're not. That's our job. Our job is to vet these folks.
Well,
Why aren't they?
I don't know if you want the executive branch of government doing background and investigations of people who are trying to run for Congress, because you know who's running the executive branch of government these days.
Yes, we do.
Respectfully, I think as a freedom issue, that's our job, is to vet candidates and try to elect the best ones we can.
Fair enough. 1 second. Russ Stately, sir.
Yeah, I have two questions, two-part question. Where do you stand on missile defense, and where do you stand on EPA?
100% supportive of missile defense. What this administration did recently by taking out some of our missile defense in the Czech Republic and Poland was wrong. We're now relying on a very stretched naval missile defense system. The ground-based radar and the ground-based missile defense is smarter and better. I mean, we've known this for 30, 40 years. I mean, since Reagan first proposed it. The EPA is out of control. Out of control. I'll give you one example. There's this numeric nutrient standard. So what happens now is radical environmentalists, and I say radical because everybody in Florida is environmentalists. We all came here because this is a beautiful state and we want to keep it beautiful. I'm talking about the people who want to shut down all our businesses for unreasonable reasons. These radical environmentalists sue the federal government. It's like, you know, suing their friends. And then they go, oh, we settled the lawsuit. There's these new standards that are going to clean up water in Florida that have no scientific basis, that are going to increase the cost to every consumer, that are going to hurt agriculture, hurt mining. So I went and rallied against it and railed against it in Washington, and Bill Nelson got so much flack for it that he had to too. Now he's going to come and campaign and say, I was there on helping out these folks. And,
he's gone.
Yeah, let me tell you, the only reason he did it is because I was hammering him, and he knew he had to do it because I was doing it.
Commissioner LaMarca, you're next, and John Sykes. Sir.
Senator, thanks to some of the folks in this room and yourself, I sit on a board as the only Republican in the Broward County Commission. And we're now going to be flying out of Fort Lauderdale Airport to Havana, Cuba. We also have a former president down there cozying up to the regime down there. What can you, along with Senator Rubio, do to kind of change that over and above the embargo?
Well, I'll tell you, it's horrible. It's horrible. Now, I want you to imagine that right now, in Vero Beach, Florida, that there's a group of people like this who are speaking out against their government. And I want you to imagine that coming through the doors are a bunch of guys, thugs, with sticks and bats and guns, who beat us all up and threw us in a bus and brought us to a jail and arrested us and held us in jail for God knows how many years and tortured us and malnourished us and all these horrible things. What would you do if you found out that that was happening 90 miles north of us in Vero Beach, Florida? You'd certainly call up your elected representatives. You might get in your car with your some firearms and, you know, effectuate your Second Amendment rights. That's happening 90 miles from Florida. 90 miles from Key West, Florida, that's happening today. They're putting people in jail for speaking out against their government. Why are we allowing this to happen? Why are we more concerned about tyrants who are killing their own people halfway around the world in Africa and not concerned about 90 miles from here? The Cold War's over. The Soviet Union's not coming to the rescue. I can't handle it. I can't stand the fact that our brothers and sisters in Cuba are being brutally killed and jailed. I just met a guy a couple months ago named Ariel Siegler, who was a prisoner in Cuba for 7 years. All he did was speak out against his government. They tortured him. He was a boxer. He was a big, strapping man. He lost 100 pounds in jail. He's in a wheelchair. 90 miles from our shore. We got to fight for the people of Cuba. We got to get rid of that regime.
Mr. Sykes, Senator, we have an interesting week coming up. Where would you stand on the CR?
Right.
What's the least debt reduction you would accept in it? And where do you stand on the 3 or 4 most important items?
I would vote against the CR. It's just window dressing. It's just Band-Aids. I voted against CRs when they would just flatline based off last year's budget. And the leadership would come to me and say, why are you voting against the continuing resolution? It's not an increase. It's keeping things flat. I'm like, it's keeping things flat. We're $1 trillion in debt. You know, you can't keep it flat at $1 trillion in debt. So I would not vote for the CR. I would want to see, we need to do hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts.
Yes.
I just want to ask you.
Speak up, please, for the whole room.
I want to ask what your feeling is about drilling oil.
I'm for it. Look, I don't want to see it 3 miles off Fort Lauderdale Beach. We got to do it smart. We're going to be reasonable about it. We want to make sure it's safe. But of course we should drill. We should drill in Alaska too, in Anwar. We should be building nuclear power plants. You know, this horrible tragedy that happened in Japan. Realize that they are doing a tremendous job, having had the worst or one of the worst earthquakes in 100 years and a tsunami. And as far as I know, and it's not over yet, as far as I know, no one has died from those nuclear power plants. So the radical environmentalists will say, oh, see, we've got to stop building nuclear power plants. Chinese are building 50 of them. We invented this technology. Jimmy Carter killed it 30 years ago. We should build 50 to 100 nuclear power plants. We got to get off of foreign oil.
Javier, Carl, and then Fred Perry. Go ahead, Javier.
You just mentioned that we need to get rid of the regime in Cuba. How do you propose that?
Well, I think that some measures have to be taken. We certainly need a new administration in this country who's not going to coddle us. We've got an American right there now that's being jailed down there, Alan Gross. Went through some kangaroo court. He was giving out internet equipment to the Jewish community in Cuba. And he's in jail now. They're going to sentence him to some bogus sentence under some bogus trial. We should not allow that. We should not only increase sanctions, we should demand that all of our Canadian and European partners who let people travel there, we should say, no, we're not going to allow that anymore. We should put sanctions against them if they're going to trade and travel to Cuba. We've got to stop it.
Should we invade?
Excuse me. 1 second. In order. Carl, please, go ahead, sir.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, sir.
The U.S. government has totally given up security on our borders. All right? I want to know why that happened all these years, why they failed to support it now that it's come to light, why they're going against the sovereign states in this union when they're trying to enforce what the federal government should be doing all along.
Yes, sir. Border protection, border security, illegal immigration, crime on the border. I went to Arizona. I traveled the entire distance, either on foot or on airplane or on Jeep, of the border between Arizona and Mexico, all the way from the California side to the New Mexico side. We can fix this problem. There are places where we fixed it pretty much. If you go to Yuma, which is all the way by California, they have stopped illegal immigration 95%. Because they got walls, they've got border patrol. When the people come over, they arrest them, they try them, they put them in jail for 90 days, and when they put them back into Mexico, they don't put them right back on the other side of the border, they put them a couple 100 miles inland. So it makes it difficult for them. So guess what? They've stopped at 95% reduction. Other places like Nogales, people are jumping over the wall. And what I never understood until I went and saw it myself is that it's not just people caravanning over across great expansive desert. That does happen. That's not the real problem. The problem are these cities that are on the border with our cities.
Right.
50,000 Americans on this side of the border, 250,000 Mexicans on that side of the border. They jump over the wall. How are you going to tell whether they're legal or not legal unless you ask them? Unless you say, I want to see your ID. They should have to have an ID. There should have to be some kind of identification. But we need to support the efforts of the states where the federal government has failed. We need a better immigration policy in Florida. We don't have the same problem as Arizona.
Well, to interrupt, I was going to say, not to interrupt. This is something after we're... I guess this is all good. Because we're going to speak in a moment of what's going on in the state of Florida with Mike Karadopoulos, who's running, as you know, that I'm very unhappy with in this room. We're going to discuss this. I'm very thankful you said that.
I'm going to withdraw my
sir.
question to give the senator time to address the... Is the senator going to address Karadopoulos or...
No, I would rather...
I'll withdraw my question, let somebody else...
Unless you have something and he wants to.
No.
I've got some ammunition. Joe, and raise your hand. Who's next? Okay, I'm next. Go ahead, sir.
There are groups, a number of groups connected to the Muslim Brotherhood that are inside the United States. Your former boss, Charlie Crist, was willing to embrace these organizations like CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And unfortunately, it looks like Governor Scott is willing to do the same. Are you willing to embrace these organizations, to allow these organizations into your office, or will you work to shut them down?
No, I'm not going to embrace these organizations. Joe, you've been a leader. You've been a leader on speaking out on this issue as long as I've known you, for 15 years when you and I were young Republicans together. Look, anybody who wants to be in this country, I don't care what their faith is, if they're peaceable and peaceful, fine. But if you are going to harbor an anti-American agenda and try to do violence to our people, we're not going to stand for it.
Thank you very
Should we
much.
do what Australia does and keep it from going in?
We're going to take one at a time because we're in a real time crunch here, so we're going to have to cut it. Maureen, can I have 2 or 3 more? What's good for you?
2.
2, okay. Because right now he's supposed to be leaving. This is going really, really well, and I appreciate him taking 2 more. Diane, please.
Senator, how
Yes,
would
ma'am.
Obamacare fit into your balanced budget?
Okay, well, let's get rid of it. I was there when we fought against it, and we were there 23 straight days in a row in the United States Senate on the floor, 1 in the morning votes, 7 a.m. votes, and I think because of what you did, you gave us the strength to be on the floor and expose this to the American people. And that's when things started to turn. You know, that's when we elected Scott Brown in Massachusetts. That's when we started to let the groundwork for November of last year that elected all these conservatives. So we got to get rid of it. We can't afford it. It's a $1 trillion new program. It cuts $500 billion out of Medicare, $500 billion out of health care for seniors. That program already is going to have financial trouble. It raises taxes, and it doesn't do anything to lower the cost of health care, which is what the president said it would do. It's 2,300 pages. It needs to go.
Excellent. Okay. We got that was the quick one there, and then somebody quietly raise their hand. That will be the final one.
The United States has the largest corporate tax in the world. Corporations are moving away from the United States. What will you do to get the rate down low enough to quit moving away and keep the jobs here in America?
Well, let me talk to you a little bit. Thank you for that great question. Let me talk to you a little bit about tax policy. We got way too many exemptions and way too many subsidies that are giveaways to special interests, and we got to get rid of them.
Right.
And if you can do that, if you get rid of everything except for maybe the charitable exemption and the mortgage exemption, then you can lower tax rates for all individuals and lower the corporate tax rate. Make sure that, now look, they're going to have to pay taxes.
Good.
You know, I saw GE's not paying any taxes.
Right.
They got to pay their fair share, but let's lower it so we can create more businesses, more jobs, more businesses coming back to the United States. That's good for everybody. But look, we're paying, for example, $5 billion a year to subsidize ethanol. $5 billion, 40 cents a gallon, which raises the price of corn, too, by the way, because there's demand for corn for ethanol. So your food prices go up. $5 billion a year for ethanol. It's ridiculous. We need a fairer, flatter tax system.
This was unbelievable. This is a great day to have a packed room and to have somebody of this stature to come before us. So please, what do you guys think?